Yes. Okay, let's start our class with Al-Kitab Al-Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Before I start the lecture, may I know if there is any questions regarding the subject? Any anything you want to share?
Doctor, did we take the third topic, demand, supply, and market equilibrium?
Yeah, we will do it for this class.
Today.
Yeah, but last week we also did an exercise. Remember?
Yeah, last week I didn't attend until the end because I was sleeping.
Why were you sleeping?
Allah, I slept and I couldn't wake up.
What happened? What made you?
I was on quarantine, and the morning I went to the hospital for my test. So I was really tired because all the morning I was there. I went back to the apartment. I said that I will sleep a little bit, but I missed the class.
So how is your result? Is it okay?
Yeah, Alhamdulillah. I'm now at the campus.
Okay. So what you can do is you can watch the recording.
Yeah, I watched it. Yeah, I watched it. But I think there was something there that was not recorded about the circular flow.
The circular flow wasn't recorded? What happened?
No, I didn't see that.
Okay, let me see if we are going to cover that for this.
No, I already revised it on YouTube. Now I understood.
Okay, that's good then. The circular flow. Oh, we already covered it last week. Okay, I think it should be okay. Yeah, but if you have any questions regarding the circular flow or any topics that have been covered, you can just contact me later. Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so I think I'll start for today's topic. Okay, so basically we'll try to see. Wait, can you see the? Share this. So there's two topics that maybe I'll try to cover for today. Number one is demand and supply, and then which is related to demand and supply is elasticity. So if only if we have time, we'll cover elasticity as well. Okay, so you remember you can revise the topics that we discuss in class by reading the textbook. Okay, so the textbook I've already shared in the Microsoft Teams. Okay, so basically the topic that is being taught in this class is based on that textbook. Okay. Okay, so let me just share the slides. Okay, so is this the one that I updated? Sorry. Okay, I think this is the one. Okay, so what we'll try to cover is the topics of demand, supply, and market equilibrium. And if we have some time, we'll also look into elasticity. Okay, so these are, I think, the fundamental build up of the economic system, right? So it makes, or it is the blood flow of the economic system that would influence all the other economic aspects. Okay, so it is important for you to really understand how demand and supply works. Okay, and then how then it can achieve market equilibrium. Okay, so the topics that we'll go through, okay, we'll briefly what I briefly talk about is number one, I'll talk about briefly about markets. Okay, number two, we'll go through the concept of demand. Number three, we'll go through the concept of supply. And then we'll go through how market equilibrium occurs. Okay. And then number five, we'll look at how equilibrium will change based on the movement of supply and demand or any intervention from outside. Okay, so this intervention is related to government intervention usually, okay, where government comes in and interferes with natural, so-called natural occurrences of supply and demand. Okay, so fundamentally, these are 6 concepts that you have to understand, okay, from this topic. Okay, so what you can do as well is you try to relate your the things that we did last week during the exercise in terms of how we set the prices, how we set the supply, and then in terms of the things that would affect the supply and demand, right? So those are the practice, but now we're looking, last week we did the practice, but now we're looking at what are the fundamental concepts behind that practice, right? So the first aspect when you look at supply and demand is basically in order for you to have that interaction between the supplier and the buyer, right? You first have to have a market. Okay, so a market is where there is interaction between buyers and sellers. Okay, if there's no market, you only can trade or do a transaction with another individual. Okay, so you do not have that choice of negotiating with other people, for example, right? So that can only occur when there is a market where buyers and sellers can go buy and sell freely. Okay, so a market in practice, they have different levels, right? So we have the market that is local, we have a market that is national, we have a market that is international, right? So similarly, if we look, for example, at the campus, I think at IUM now we have the Ramadan market, I think, and then there's some bazaars, right, that's happening. That's also a form of market, which is only local for IUM. But if you go outside, you can see the agriculture market, for example, or the supermarket, right? So that's another type of market, but still localized, right? And then if you go much wider, then you have a national market where buyers and sellers from all around the country can buy and trade and buy and sell, right? And then finally, we have the international market where buyers and sellers from outside of the country can also participate. Okay, so basically, if you realize from the interaction that the buyers and sellers had, okay, when for example, last week you were negotiating, right? So the buyer would offer a price, and then it would also depend on what the price is, what price is offered by the seller as well, right? So at the end of the day, in order for the transaction to occur, there must be an agreement between the buyer and seller, right? So this can, before that agreement can arrive, there might be different levels of prices from the buyer and different levels of prices from the seller, right? But at the end of the day, when they agree, then that is where the price in the market is discovered. Okay, so this is where the price in the market is discovered, and it can only be discovered if there is interaction between buyers and sellers, right? So a seller can maybe offer his product for a certain price, but if the product is too expensive, then at the end of the day, a transaction will not occur. Okay, so then he would have to lower down his price in order for a buyer to buy his product, right? Or a buyer can offer a much lower product and then a much lower price, and then if the seller agrees, then the price discovery will occur. Okay, so basically, when we look at the concept of markets, we look at the concept of we would refer it to we would refer to a competitive market, okay, where there is a large number of buyers and sellers. Okay, so this is where usually the best situation where price discovery can occur. Okay, it is only when there is a competitive market, right? But if it's not competitive, price discovery can still occur, but it wouldn't be as efficient. Okay, it may take a longer time, and then the prices of the prices and quality of goods and services may not be as good as in a competitive market, right? So this is the first concept when it comes to demand and supply. It must have a market first. Okay. Now, when we look at the second concept, okay, which is called demand. Okay, so demand is basically a reflection of what amount a consumer is willing and able to purchase at a given price. Okay, so it's not only, so here the keywords are not only willing, but it's also able, right? So maybe a customer can say, I want to pay 1 million for that Ferrari, right? But then is he actually able to purchase the Ferrari, right? So there is the factor of able, right? So some may be willing to pay, but whether or not he is able, that's another factor that must be taken into consideration, right? So from this consumer willingness and ability, you can jot down, or you can draw this demand schedule, or in other words, we call it also the demand curve. Okay, so although in some cases it is straight line. Okay, although, so the demand curve is, we look into this later. The demand curve is downward sloping. It always goes downward sloping. Okay, so although it is sometimes a straight line, it is called a curve. It is called a curve, the demand curve. Okay, so this basically would represent the consumer's willingness and ability. Okay, but of course, when we draw the demand curve, there are a lot of factors that comes into play. Okay, so we always have to consider this concept of ceteris paribus. Okay, whereby the analysis of the demand and supply will focus only on a certain factor. Okay, so we will assume that all the other factors are not changing during that time that we are referring to the main factor. Okay, so that's also another important aspect. And then here, basically, when we look at collective demand of individuals, okay, meaning to say that if we add up the demand of the people in the market, okay, or consumers in the market, we will then have the market demand. Okay, so we have an individual's demand. Okay, so the individual's demand, for example, it can be the individual demand of Amira, or the individual demand of Munira, or the individual demand of Bailo, or the individual demand of Sundus, or the individual demand of Mahmud, right? So if we add everyone's demand together, then we will get the market demand. Okay, so this is the concept whereby you can also relate it to the concept of micro and macroeconomics, right? So microeconomics usually is looking at the more individual level, but when you go further out, you look at the aggregate. So the aggregate is where you add everything together, right? So this is where the market demand happens. Okay. So basically, there is a law of demand. Okay, a law of demand. Okay. So like
Doctor,
other
what is ceteris paribus?
ceteris paribus is a Latin word. Okay, sorry, I forgot to translate. Which translates to oh yes, other things equal. Sorry. So ceteris paribus means other things are equal. Okay, so for example, how do you say this? So let's say the demand of a pen, okay, depends on equal. Yeah, depends on the income of a person, price of the pen, and quality. Let's see. Okay. So, for example, if we want to look at, so basically, let's say there are three factors. Okay, three factors that would influence the demand. Okay, income, price, quality. Okay, so let's say now we want to look at what is the effect of a person's income towards the demand of a pen. Okay, so when we want to look at income, okay, and the effects on the demand, we assume factor number 2 and factor number 3 doesn't change. Okay, we just assume that, because if we don't assume that, then we cannot analyze the effects of income towards the demand, because of course maybe other things may also change as well. Okay, so in this case, when we want to look at the effects of income towards demand, we assume price and quality of the pen is ceteris paribus. It doesn't change. Okay, so then we can look at income. For example, the higher the income, the higher our income, the higher the demand for the pen, right? And then the lower the income, the lower the demand for the pen, right? Because we are assuming other factors doesn't change, right? But if let's say our income increases, at the same time the quality of the pen reduces. Okay, so if the income increases and quality of the pen reduces, then the demand may not change, or the demand, instead of increasing, it would decrease, right? So in order for us to analyze just that factor, we have to assume other things do not change, right? So similarly, when you do research later on, when you want to analyze an effect of A towards B, you have to assume other factors that would influence B are not changing. So you are just working within that model as only. And so this is a very important aspect when it comes to not only economics but also scientific method. So when you look at a certain factor, you have to assume the other factors that would influence the outcome does not change, right? So hopefully you get my explanation. But if you don't, you
Yes,
have to
yes, doctor.
go through the textbook or watch any videos for further explanation, because it is a very important concept. Okay, so thank you for asking that question. Okay, so for demand, okay, and we'll see later on for supply as well, it has what we call a law of demand, right? So the law in For example, in science, right, we have the law of gravity. So law of gravity, you cannot challenge it, because it's there. It is what it is, right? Because it has gone through all the scientific method, and in terms of the application, it is there. Okay, so similarly in economics, we have different laws as well, and this is based on the scientific method and based on the observation. So this is what makes or becomes the foundation of the economics that we learn. Okay, so for a law of demand, okay, the law says that, okay, other things equal. So other things equal meaning ceteris paribus. Okay, meaning that all the other factors are not changing. Okay, so the law says that as the price falls, the quantity demanded increases. Okay, as price falls, quantity demanded increases. Okay, and as price increases, quantity demanded would fall. Okay, so this is normal. Okay, this is normal. Okay, if it is a normal good and services, usually if prices fall, quantity demanded rises. Okay, however, we'll see later there are cases where when price increases, actually demand also increases. So these are unique goods and services that goes against the law of demand, but it actually happens. Okay, but by default, law of demand is like that. Okay, when price falls, quantity demanded rises. Okay, so why does this happen? Why do they say that this is a law of demand? Okay, because basically there are four main reasons. There are four main reasons why when prices fall, quantity demanded increases. When prices increases, quantity demanded falls. Okay, so there must be a reason why this happens, why the law of demand happens. Okay, so number one, it is there's no slide there. Okay, so number one, why this happens is because we have limited income. Okay, we have limited income. So based on our income, okay, we will allocate a certain portion or certain percentage of our income to buy a certain good, okay, a certain thing. Okay, let's say it is a pen. Right, so this pen, let's say our income is 1,000 and this pen is $10. Okay, so we will allocate basically or let's say our income is 100, the pen is $10. Okay, so we allocate 10% of our income to buy the pen. Okay, so we can buy one pen for $10. Okay, so now let's say the price of the pen decreases to $5. Okay, and because of that, we've already allocated our income. Okay, I think I can illustrate this. Okay, so let's say income is 100 and pen is 10. Okay, so we allocate 10%. Okay, so now when the price of the pen reduces to 5, okay, we can now buy 2 pens because the price has reduced. Okay, so when the price falls, the quantity that we demand of the pen has now also increased. Okay, so that's reason number one. Okay, and reason number two is what we call the law of diminishing. Sorry, okay. Before that, going back to reason number one, yeah. So this only happens if we have limited income. However, if we have unlimited income, the price doesn't matter. The price doesn't matter. It's so the quantity that we buy or sell doesn't consider the price. Why? Because we have unlimited income, right? So in that case, the law of demand would collapse. Okay, it doesn't follow the law of demand anymore. But of course, everyone has limited income. Okay, even Bill Gates have limited income. Okay, although he's a billionaire, he still has to choose how much he wants to buy or sell. Okay, so that's basically the reason for number one. Okay, and then number two, why the law of demand occurs is because of the law of diminishing marginal utility. I think this is also a very important concept. Okay, so the law of diminishing marginal utility is basically related. Wait, let me just check this again. Because I thought there's a video on this. That's okay. Maybe later, if we have time, we'll watch a video on the law of diminishing marginal utility. So basically, the law of diminishing marginal utility is related to the is related to the decrease. Let me just change the color. Related to the decrease in added satisfaction. Okay, basically the simple example is you can imagine if you buy a large pizza. Okay, so if you buy a large pizza, okay, so and then if you, let's say, divide it into 8, okay, and you're really hungry, right? So you're really hungry. So when you consume the first slice of pizza, you have a utility. Okay, utility is basically happiness or satisfaction. Okay, you would have a very high satisfaction of consuming the first pizza. Okay, so let's say we put your satisfaction as 100. Okay, and then when you consume the second slice of pizza, you also get some satisfaction. Okay, let's say now, but the satisfaction that you receive is not as much as the first slice of pizza. So the first slice, let's say you will rate it over 100, you get 100. But the second, you still get satisfaction from eating it, but now the satisfaction has reduced to 80. Okay, and then you're still hungry. Maybe now you eat the third pizza. Okay, so now the third pizza that you consume, you still get satisfaction, but out of 100, maybe your satisfaction is only 50. By the fourth pizza, it's only 10. By the fifth pizza, you're already full and you don't have any satisfaction anymore. Okay, and now by the sixth pizza, if you consume it, maybe you will get a negative satisfaction because you're already full and you're forcing yourself to eat the sixth slice of pizza. If you eat the seventh slice, maybe now you become a bit sick because you're too bloated. By the time you eat the eighth pizza, now you feel unwell. So it's negative satisfaction, right? So in this case, the more that you consume, you will have less and less satisfaction. Okay, so this is the term that is used in economics is utility. Okay, so what happens when you consume every time you consume more and more is there will be the satisfaction will be diminishing. Okay, so every time you consume more, you still get satisfaction up to a certain point. So in this case, you will get satisfaction only up to the 4th slice. By the 5th slice, there's no difference. Okay, there's zero satisfaction. Okay, so the when we look at this, right, in terms of the satisfaction, okay, and if you put a price on the satisfaction, okay, if let's say instead of the numbers being satisfaction, now you would say that this is actually the price that you would pay for the first slice of pizza would be 100. For the second slice of pizza, maybe I will only pay 80. By the 5th slice, by the 3rd slice, only 50. By the 4th slice, you would only pay 10. For the 5th slice, maybe you do not want to pay anymore because you're already full. Okay, so if someone gives it to you for free, maybe you will eat it. Okay, but for the 6th slice, you would only eat it if someone gives you $10 and then you will eat it. So you wouldn't be willing to pay for it, right? So and if you consume more, you wouldn't want to basically spend to consume more. Okay, so only the first 4 consumption you are willing to pay. Okay, but every consequent consumption is where you pay less and less. Okay, because you get less and less satisfaction with each consumption, right? So this is as we'll see later on, it will shape the law of demand. Okay, so as the price falls, okay, the quantity demanded also falls, and it will, this is based on also on the law of diminishing marginal utility. Let me just pause for a while because there's Azan here. Okay, so that's reason number 2. Okay, and then we have reason number 3, which is the income effect. Okay, so the income effect is basically related to the first one, but it's different because the income effect is related to the purchasing power. Okay, so whereby if the income increases, okay, there is more demand for a certain good. Okay, because if you allocate, let's say previously you allocate, if when you had 100 and you allocated 10%, 10% to buy the pen. Okay, 10% to buy the pen. But now let's say instead of 100, you have 1,000 income. Okay, so now your purchasing power has increased because you still allocate 10% of your income to buy the pen, right? But because of the income increase, you now can buy more pens, right? So that's also an income effect. Okay, and this will also shape the demand curve. Okay, and then finally is the substitution effect. Okay, so basically the substitution effect is looking at the substitutes. Okay, and we will look at this concept in more detail later on. Okay, whereby when you buy a certain item, there's always a substitute towards it. Okay, there's always an alternative that you can choose. Okay, unless you are in a place where there's no option. Okay, but of course, if you look globally in any market, usually there's always an alternative to an item. Okay, so basically the substitution effect is where the price of the good would affect, the price of the substitute would affect whether or not you are willing to buy that item. Okay, so if it's lower priced as compared to its substitute, then you are more willing to buy it. Okay, so basically all these reasons shape why the demand curve is downward sloping. Okay, so the demand curve is like this. Okay, and it's not like this. Okay, so this slide basically talks about why is it shaped like this, okay, instead of this. Okay, and the 4 points here is basically highlighting why it's shaped downward sloping. Okay, downward sloping. Okay, so basically, okay, if you put into consideration all the factors that we discussed just now, the 4 factors that we discussed just now, and you look at an individual's demand. Okay, so in this example, a demand for corn, yeah, demand for corn. Okay, so when we draw the curve, okay, so when we draw the demand and supply curve, we would plot the price here and the quantity here. So it's always like this, price and quantity. Okay, in any economic curve, in any economic graph, usually the price will be here on top here and the quantity down there. Okay, so let's say we look at an individual's demand for corn. Okay, or maybe you can say, you can imagine it's my demand. Okay, so my demand for corn is that if the corn's price is $5, I would buy 10 of it. Okay, if the corn's price is $4, I would buy 20. If it's 3, I would buy 35. If it's 2, I would buy 55. And if it's $1, I would buy 80. Okay, so this is my individual demand. Okay, so basically based on this, okay, if we plot each price and quantity demanded, okay, basically the curve will look like that. Okay, and this is for any normal item that is being sold in the market. Basically, if you see the price going down, you would likely demand or buy more of it. Okay, so when you plot the individual's demand on the graph, okay, it will always look like this, downward sloping. So the term is downward sloping. Okay, so you imagine going down a hill. Okay, so this is downward sloping. Okay, so all those factors that I mentioned just now causes this shape. Okay, the income factor, the substitution factor, the diminishing marginal utility factor, and also the limited income factor. Okay, so that is the reason why my individual demand for corn is downward sloping. Okay. Okay, let's try to figure out, discuss this. Okay. Let's see who's here. We have okay. So just answer this question. What is your demand? Well, actually, I'll try to ask everyone. Okay, Munira, what's your demand for coffee? Mr. Munira, are you there?
Yes.
How much are you willing to pay for a coffee? For one coffee?
Maybe
Sorry, can't hear you.
$2.
How about a Starbucks coffee?
I don't really drink coffee.
Okay, how about, let's say, tea? Coffee or tea, right? So coffee or tea
For tea, I
or
would
bubble tea?
maybe $10.
Okay, so coffee or tea, Munira, for one is 10, huh? How about Amira? Are you there,
Coffee?
Amira? Yeah, coffee or tea.
Coffee.
Okay, for coffee, how much are you willing to pay for a cup of good coffee or cappuccino or whatever coffee that you like?
7 to 10 ringgit.
Let's say if you go to a cafe and the cafe puts a price of 12 ringgit, are you willing to pay for it?
If I want it, yes, I'm willing to pay for it.
The best price that you are willing to pay is
Willing
7 lah.
to pay.
Yeah, 7. Is it? On
10,
average,
10, 10.
10. Okay, Bilo, do you drink coffee, Bilo?
Yes, I drink coffee, doctor.
So how much are you willing to pay?
I
coffee?
will pay 10 ringgit.
10 ringgit, huh?
Yeah.
Sundus? Sister Sundus?
Yes, doctor.
How much you're willing to pay? 15.
Yeah.
Okay. Sister Mahmoud? Or brother Mahmoud? I don't know. Is it brother or sister Mahmoud?
Brother.
Brother Mahmoud?
Yeah,
Okay. How much you willing to pay
for the tea.
for the tea? Whatever
Five.
tea. 5.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, so so basically if we look at the individual's demand, okay, in terms of how much you are willing to pay for a common drink, right? It is different from each other. Okay, but what happens is that, let's say, assuming this is the price that everyone's willing to pay for coffee. Okay, so what happens is that if you add all of this together, okay, then you would get the market demand. Okay, and then now try to imagine you've already purchased one unit of coffee. Okay, now the question is, how much are you willing to pay for the second cup of coffee. Okay, so I would imagine also the prices here would be different. Okay, and then the third cup of coffee would also be different, right? So, but what is for sure is that the amount that you are willing to pay is most likely much less than the first coffee or first tea that you purchase, because you already consume one and usually it's already enough, but some maybe they want more. But the second cup that you are willing to offer to buy would be most likely much lower than the first cup that you buy. Okay, and then basically when you add everyone's price and quantity together, then you would get the market demand of the coffee. Okay, so similarly, if we look at the economic demand, it is basically adding everyone's demand of that item together, and also the price they are willing to pay, and in terms of the quantity that they are willing to purchase. Okay, so that's just maybe something that I want you to envision, so you can understand the demand. Okay, so here, okay, is an example of the case study. Okay, so basically, if let's say there is a market for corn, okay, and there are only 3 buyers in the market. Okay, so there's Joe, there's Jen, and there's Jay. Okay, so if, for example, the price that is offered, okay, so the term that is being used is a bushel. Okay, so this is a bushel. Okay, so the bushel is one container. Okay, and basically, if you put the corn there, it would be 56 pounds. Okay, so this is the American unit. Okay, but this is the common unit that is being used for commodities like corn. Okay, so let's say if the price that is being offered in the market for a bushel of corn is $5. Okay, what happens is that Joe would demand 10, Jen would demand 12, and J would demand 8. Okay, and then the price reduces from 5 to 4. So the demand for each individual also changes. Okay, and when you add all this together, okay, you can get the total demand, the total quantity that is demanded in the market. Okay, so similarly, if you look at another perspective of your demand for coffee, okay, so for example, if the price that is being offered for the coffee or tea is $15, okay, there will only be one buyer, which is Sundus. Okay, because the others may not be as willing to buy the coffee, because other people, their demand for coffee is only when the coffee price is $15. Okay, so only when the price of coffee reduces from 15 to 10, then more people will demand for it. Okay, because some may be willing to consume an alternative to coffee. Maybe instead of buying coffee, I can buy, with the money that I have, I can buy tea. Okay, so that's another perspective of looking at the question of the demand for coffee just now. Okay, so here, okay, so this is just an illustration, yeah, based on the demand of each buyer. You can add everything together and you get the total of quantity demanded. Okay, so when you add everything together, okay, so then you can have the market demand, and when you plot it on the graph, okay, so this is what happens. Okay, but of course, in real world, in our economy, there's more than 3 buyers. Okay, and there's more than just one seller. Okay, so maybe there are different suppliers. Okay, there's more than one supplier of corn, and there are more, of course, there's more than 3 buyers of corn. Okay, so but if you add everything together, you will get the market demand, and this is called the aggregate demand. Okay, so there is also what we call, okay, the changes, the change, okay, here the red words here. Okay, there is a difference between change in demand and change in quantity demanded. Okay, so the change in quantity demanded is where we have this graph. Okay, so D1, so let's say demand 1, we have different quantities that are demanded in D1. We have quantity 2, where when the price is 5, the quantity demanded is 2. When the price is 4, the quantity demanded is 4. When the price is 3, the quantity demanded is 7. Okay, so this is change. There is changes in the quantity demanded based on the price. Okay, for D1. Okay, for D1. Okay, however, there will be cases, and we look at the reasons why, when the demand itself changes. Okay, so there is a difference between change in quantity demanded and a change in demand. Okay, so the change in demand is illustrated by the movement of D1 to either D2 or D3. Okay, so demand can increase when it goes, here it shows the increase is shown by the movement to D2, or it can decrease to D3. Okay, so the demand curve itself can move up or down. Okay, however, there's also a change in quantity demanded where the movement is on the original curve. Okay, so the movement is on the D1. Okay, but when D1 changes and shifts to the right or shifts to the left, then this is the term that we use for this is a change in demand. Okay, so that's number the when there is a shift. Okay, when there is a shift of demand, then this is change in demand. Okay, when there's a movement on demand curve. Okay, so this is number 2. Okay, so this is also something that you have to bear in mind. Okay, so we look at the factors on why this happened. Okay, so basically the reasons why there is a change in quantity demanded or change in demand, there are different factors. Okay, so among others, the main reasons, okay, there are 3.
Doctor, I didn't understand well the change in demand and quantity demanded.
Sorry. So the change in quantity demanded is this. Okay, so when there is only one demand curve, in this case, this is D1, right? So on D1, there are different quantities, right? So this is quantity. This is the quantity here. So the quantities can change depending on the price. Okay, so it is a movement on D1. Okay, so this is basically representing change in quantity demanded, which is number 2 here. Okay, understand? When there is a movement on D1, for example, let's say this is your demand for corn. Okay, so when the corn price is when the price of corn is 5, when the price of corn is 5, you would only buy two bushels of corn, right? But when the price of corn is 4, you would buy more, right? Because now the price has reduced. Right? So this is what we call a change in quantity demanded. Okay, and at different prices you would have different quantity that you would demand. Okay, you would have different quantities that you demand. Okay, understood? For this change in quantity demanded?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I understand.
So there will be instances where the demand curve itself changes totally. Okay, so it may move to the right, it may move to the left. Okay, so this is termed change in demand. Okay, it may move to the right, and that will mean an increase in demand, and it will move to the left. This will mean a decrease in demand. So at different curves, okay, for example, let's say now there is an increase in demand and your new demand curve is at D2. Your new demand curve is at D2. Okay, so your at the price of, let's say, $5, now your quantity demanded has changed from originally it was here, it was 2. Okay, but now because the shift of demand to the right, your quantity that you demand is now 5. Okay, so there is now a change in demand because there is a shift of the demand curve. So there's a difference, right? In terms of the quantity that is demanded and the change in demand itself. So your demand curve has changed. Okay, so that is the one on number 1. But if there is a movement along, let's say now the new demand curve is D2, this is what we call change in quantity demanded. So your demand curve doesn't shift, but depending on the price, you have different quantities that you demand. Okay, so maybe it's a bit confusing, but we'll look at, hopefully when we look at the determinants of demand, you can get a better idea. Okay, so basically there are different reasons why this happens. Okay, why this happens is because I think there's 5 reasons. Okay, yeah, there's 5 reasons, 5 main reasons. Okay, so number 1 is because there is a change in consumer taste and preferences. Okay, so for example, this is the price and this is the quantity. Yeah, your demand for coffee is here, D1. Okay, but now suddenly you discovered a new product that can be a substitute. Okay, in terms of you would prefer another product. Okay, so instead of coffee, you would prefer bubble tea, for example. So we have different types of bubble teas, right? But now, because you prefer bubble tea as compared to coffee, maybe your demand curve has reduced. Okay, let's say this is for coffee. So originally your demand for coffee is like this, and let's say you would pay one coffee $10. Okay, the price 10, demand 1. Okay, and for the second coffee you would only pay, let's say, 8 for the second coffee, for example, right? And then the third coffee, 6, for example. So this is your original demand curve. But now, because you discovered bubble tea, your preference for coffee has reduced. Okay, so now the demand you have for coffee has shifted to the right. So from D1, you have a new demand for coffee, D2. Okay, so for D2, okay, for 1 cup of for 1 cup of coffee, okay, now you are willing to only you will buy 1 cup of coffee only if the price is 8. If the price is 10, you wouldn't buy the coffee. You wouldn't buy the coffee. Why? Because you have different preference now. You have different taste now. Okay. So there is a change in your demand, okay? So this will basically determine your demand for coffee because your taste and preference has changed, right? So previously you were willing to pay 10 for 1 cup of coffee, okay, at D1, but because your taste has changed, now you are only willing to pay 8 to buy one cup of coffee. If the price is 10, you wouldn't buy. It would be zero quantity. Okay, so only if the price reduce further, then you will buy the first cup. Okay, so this basically number one here. When your taste and preferences changes, it will determine your demand for a certain item. Okay, so this is number one. Number two, what is the determinant of demand is when there is a change in the number of buyers. Okay, so for example, if there is a lot of buyers in the economy, okay, so when there are many people that demand for your item that you sell, right? Many people demand it, you can put a high price for it, right? So you can put a high price for it. If let's say most customers now shift to another product, so the number of people that buy your item is now less, and in order for you to entice them to buy, you have to reduce the price. Okay, but let's say the price doesn't change. Okay, so if the price doesn't change, then the quantity that is demanded, reduces because the number of buyer reduces. Okay, so this is, you can imagine, let's say this is the demand for your item. Okay, let's say you sell pens. Here you sell pens, and the quantity based on the price, let's say you sell it for $10, okay, and you can sell 100 units of pen. Okay, but this is based on demand one. Okay, so when the quantity of buyers reduce, for example, the quantity of buyers reduce from D1 to D2. Okay, now if you keep on selling the pen at $10, okay, you see the quantity of pen that you can sell is maybe only 20. Okay, so this is another determinant of demand when the number of buyers reduces or changes. Okay, or it can also be increased, right? So if the number of buyers increase, maybe the demand curve also increases. Okay, so this is the second factor. Okay, the third factor is when there is a change in income. Okay, so this you can look at it from an individual level or from a macroeconomic level. For an individual level, basically, if you have more income, okay, the more income that you have, the more of a certain good you would purchase. Okay, so maybe previously you would only spend your money to buy 1 cup of coffee. Okay, so for coffee, maybe you buy one, you spend only one in the morning. Okay, so your quota is I'll only buy 1 coffee in the morning. But then if you have a change in income, maybe you have extra wages or extra income. Instead of buying 1 cup of coffee, you would now buy 2 cups, maybe one for breakfast and then another one during lunch, right? Because of your change in income. Okay, and then maybe you have more money. Now instead of buying 1 or 2, you buy 3. Right? So maybe I'll buy 1 for breakfast and 1 during lunch and another one for my friend during lunch. So now the demand also changes. Okay, so this is applicable for normal goods. Okay, so normally the higher the income, okay, when income increase, demand for normal goods, DN, also increase. However, there are cases where when income increase, demand decrease. Okay, so this is applicable to inferior goods. Okay, so one example of inferior goods is this, the infamous instant noodle. So in Malaysia, we have the most famous one is Maggi. It's called Maggi. Okay, so usually, okay, if it is a normal good, the higher your income, the more you will buy. Okay, but for an inferior good, once your income reaches a certain level, you would no longer buy that item. Okay, so the example here is inferior good. Okay, it is the Maggi. So let's say it's normal, right? I think for students especially, when I was student, this is something that I would always buy and eat, right? So this is something that I would buy and consume all the time because of my income. Okay, but once I reach a certain income level, my demand for Maggi has reduced, and it's very rare for me to consume now. Okay, so I have shifted from purchasing Maggi, maybe because of my higher income. Now I buy rice, or I buy mee, right? So I buy ramen, for example. So this is applicable to, the term is inferior goods. So for inferior goods, the higher your income, the lower the demand you have for that good. Okay, so this is also a determinant of demand. Another factor, you can say this is factor 4, is when there is a change in prices of related goods. Okay, so related goods, there are two types of related goods. Okay, number 1, complementary goods. Number 2 is substitute goods. Okay, so the example here for complementary goods is ink and printer. Okay, so the idea is that if ink prices, let's say ink prices increase, printer price, if ink prices increase, okay, printer demand let's say ink prices of ink increase, printer demand would decrease. Why? Because they are complementary to each other. Okay, and the other way around is also true. If ink prices decrease, printer demand would increase. Right? Because overall, the price of these two things come together. Okay, so these are complementary goods. Okay. Another related good is the substitute good. So the example here is toothpaste. Right. So Malaysia, I think we have let's say Colgate and Dali. Okay. But of course there's a lot more toothpaste in the market. So let's say they are substitute to each other. Okay. And let's say for one Colgate is $10, one Dali is $10. Okay, and maybe you have a preference for Colgate. Okay, so you buy Colgate. Okay, but then when you see the price of Dali has reduced to $8. Okay, now you think, okay, now because Dali has reduced $8, I can save $2. Maybe I can buy a tea for $2. So now the demand for Dali has increased, and the demand for Colgate has decreased. Okay, so the demand for Colgate has decreased because there was a change not on its price, but there was a change on the price of the substitute. Okay, so this basically would also affect the demand. Okay, so the price of the substitute would affect the demand of the item that you are demanding. Okay, so this is also another factor. Actually, this numbering is already correct. Right, so the factor of complementary goods is number 4, and then the factor of substitute goods is number 5, And then another determinant for demand is future prices. So future prices is where you expect there will be a change in prices in the future. Okay, for example, if you want to purchase a house, let's say the price of the house is $500,000. Okay. However, you expect in the future, let's say in the next few months, the price of the house will reduce to 450,000 because of the economic situation is getting worse, and you can expect in the future the price will reduce. Okay. So what happens is that the demand in the present will reduce. Okay, so your demand of the house in the present will reduce because you would expect in the future you will buy it at a lower price. Okay, and similarly, okay, so that's factor number 6. Okay, and then we have factor number 7, future income. So, for example, if you expect your income to reduce, okay, future income to reduce, what happens is that current or present consumption will also reduce because you expect now, for example, my income is let's say 1,000, and then because of the economic situation, maybe my boss will cut my income from 1,000 to 800. Okay, so now I have to spend less. Okay, when I spend less, then of course the demand overall will reduce. Okay, I will purchase less coffee, for example. Maybe I will, instead of buying one coffee every day, maybe only buy once every other day. Okay, or maybe once a week. Okay, so the demand for coffee has reduced overall. Okay, but if let's say I expect my income to increase, okay, maybe I will get a raise in the future. Maybe next month I will get a raise from 1,000, I will get 1,500. Right, so now maybe I can, because I will get more income, I'll spend more. So maybe I'll buy one coffee for my friend as well. So then the overall demand for coffee will also increase. Okay, so that also would affect the demand curve. Okay, so the demand curve can shift to the right, shift to the left, but also there will be a movement along the line of the demand curve. Okay. And then yeah, so this is basically the other examples, right? So this is the determinant of demand. Okay, so this is where, for example, the term ceteris paribus is very important. Okay, so if you want to look at the determinant of buyer's taste, you have to assume these factors doesn't change. These other factors doesn't change. Okay, so similarly, if you want to look at the factor of income, you would assume that other factors that are listed here doesn't change. So you have to always assume ceteris paribus. Okay, but of course, in the real world, all these factors may change at the same time. Okay, so these are basically the factors that would shift the demand curve. So shifting is basically the term that is being used to say that the demand curve has moved. Okay, so it can move either to the right, okay, so D1 to D2, or it can move to the left, D3. Okay, so the curve will always, the graph will always have the price up there and then the quantity down there. Okay, so these are the factors that would shift the demand curve. Okay, so that's demand. Is that clear? Is there any questions for demand before I move to the next one? Supply. Yeah, everyone okay? Or is it too confusing now? Okay. I'll move to the next part. Yeah. Okay. So now the next part in economics. Okay, this is also quite important. Okay, we have the demand, but we also have the supply. Okay, so for supply, is basically a representation of the amount that producers are willing and able to sell at a given price. Okay, so similar to consumer demand. So the demand just now was consumer willing and able to buy. So supply is producer willing and able to sell. Okay, so there's the individual supply, there's the market supply. Okay, so there's also the law for supply. Okay, so the law for supply says as price increases, the quantity supplied increases. As price falls, the quantity supplied falls. Okay, so you will have to imagine now, instead of from the perspective of a buyer, you have to imagine perspective of the seller. Let's say you are selling pens, right? So you're selling pens, and the market price for pens now is $10. Okay, so you would supply a certain unit of goods. Okay? But instead of $10, let's say now the price has increased to $15. So what would happen is that you would now try to produce more pens, and you have to increase the quantity that you supply in the market. Why? Because the price has increased and you can sell it for a higher price. So you now have to improve the production in your factory and increase the quantity that is supplied. Okay, but let's say instead of $15, the price goes down from $10 to $5. So because of the reduction in price, now you would supply less. Okay, instead of producing too many pens, maybe I can use the machines to produce something else. Okay, so the quantity that is supplied is reduced. Okay, so this is basically the concept of the related to the concept of incentive to producers. Okay, so as a seller, the incentive is to get the highest profit possible. Okay, so no matter which seller, a Muslim seller or a non-Muslim seller, it's always about trying to get as much profit as possible based on the price and the quantity that is in the market. Okay, so a higher price that you can sell, the higher the price that you can sell, the more that you want to supply. Okay, and also another factor is when the cost is also a factor that would influence the price and quantity. Okay, so when this happens, it will also increase the price of goods that is being supplied. Okay, and if you plot, for example, the supply curve. Okay, let's say you are a supplier of corn. Okay, you supply corn, and if the price that you are selling in the market is $5, you would supply 60 bushels of corn. Okay, for $4 you would supply less. Okay, as the price goes down, the quantity that is supplied also goes down. So if you plot it in a graph, okay, the quantity and the price, it will have different dots. Okay, and then if you draw a line together on the dots, it will basically form a upward sloping curve.
But doctor, why if the price rises, then the quantity demanded will increase? I think
no, this is not quantity demanded. This is quantity supplied.
Okay, quantity supplied. Why is it increasing the quantity? That it's supposed to be that if the price is lesser, then the quantity supplied will be higher. So that
you have to think from the perspective of a seller.
Okay.
The perspective of a seller, right? So if in the market you can only sell, let's say the corn you can sell only for $1 here. Okay, and you have the machines to produce the corn, right? But now, because the price is only $1, if you produce too much, you would experience a loss because the cost of producing is not worth it, right? Because you have to hire workers, you have to buy the petrol to ensure that the machines and the tractors are used, right? So there's always a cost to producing something, right? So if the price in the market is too low, you wouldn't want to supply, right? So I think this is if you for I think some Malaysians would can relate to this, and maybe in your country as well. What happened was that I think there was a issue with the price of chicken, where the government wanted to put a ceiling price. So the government said, you sellers can only sell chicken maximum, if not mistaken, 10 ringgit. Okay, but there was a maximum price for chicken. Okay. So, but the seller said, we cannot sell it for 10 ringgit because the cost of producing the chicken itself is more than 10 ringgit. Right. So in order to break even, we can only sell it for 12 ringgit. If we sell it for 10 ringgit, we will have a loss. Okay, so what happened was that I think many producers of the chicken, they didn't because I think one of the main factors for the in terms of the cost of the chicken was the the chicken feed. So what happened was that the chicken feed increased in terms of the price. So when the price was capped, or it was the government said you cannot sell more than the ceiling price. So the chicken suppliers they didn't buy the chicken feed. They didn't buy the chicken food, right? But the term is feed. Okay, so when they didn't buy, basically they just let the chicken die off, or the chicken that they didn't breed more chicken. So the supply in the market also reduced, right? But if the price, of course, if the price increase more, now they are more inclined to supply more in the market, right? Because instead of selling for 10, you can now sell for 15. So now we will supply more in the market because we can get more profit, right? So the higher the price that the supplier can sell in the market, the more supply that they will give in the market. Okay. And does that answer the question, brother?
Yeah, I get it.
Okay. Okay, so you have to think from the perspective of the supplier. Okay, just now for demand, you think from the perspective of a buyer. Okay, and later we'll see how these two will interact in the market. Okay. Yeah, so this is, so maybe now you try to think of a perspective if you open a coffee shop. Okay, Brother Mahmoud, if you open a coffee shop, how much are you willing to sell the coffee for one coffee?
Okay, 20.
20.
Yeah, $20.
20, yeah? You want to sell for $20?
Yeah.
Sorry. How about Sundus? How much, if you open a coffee shop, how much will you sell your coffee? Are you there, Sundus?
$10.
10.
Yeah.
How about Bayo?
I will go for 20.
20. Munira?
15.
50.
15.
15. Amira?
15?
15 too. Okay. So now compare what was your demand for coffee or bubble tea. So if you compare your supply, so this is your supply, right? This is how much you are willing to sell to your demand just now. how much were you willing to pay for coffee? How many would actually buy the coffee that you sell from your cafe? Right, I think most of you would only pay, maximum was 15 just now, right? And then I think most of you would only pay 10. Okay, so there is a mismatch here between the supply and demand. Okay, so you just compare with whatever price that you were willing to pay just now. Okay, so this is something I want you to think of, and then we'll move closer to the concept later. Okay. Okay, so similar to the demand curve. Okay, so similar to the demand curve, there's also the change in quantity supplied. Okay, so the change in quantity supplied. So let's say for supply 1, S1 here, okay, there is the supply 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, so basically there is a change in the quantity supplied. Okay, but the change is basically based on S1. Okay, and at different prices, there will be different quantity that is supplied. Okay, and then, okay, so that's number 2 here. Okay, and then there's also the change in supply. Change in supply is when there is a shift of the supply either to the right or to the left. Okay, so when it shifts to the right, it is basically representing an increase in supply. When there is a shift to the left, this is representing a decrease in supply. Okay, so when there is a shift, the term that is used in is number 1 here. When there is a movement on the curve, we use the term 2 here, the quantity supply, change in quantity. Okay, so there's a difference between change in supply and change in quantity supply. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Okay, so there are many reasons on why there is a shift, okay, on the supply, why there is movement of the supply curve from to the left or to the right. Okay, so maybe S1 move to the left, S2, and move to the right, S3. Okay, so price is here, quantity is here. Okay, so reason number 1, there is a change in resource prices. Okay, so just now I mentioned the price of chicken, right? So let's say if the resource price, the input for chicken is the chicken feed. So if the price of chicken feed increases, then the price of chicken may also increase because this is a cost to produce the chicken. Okay, so this will basically change the supply. Okay, secondly is change in technology. Okay, for example, you had if you have a factory and you had a very old machine, so that machine is outdated, so now you purchase a new machine with new technology, and because of that you can be more efficient and you can produce more at a lower price. Okay, so this will also affect your supply. Okay, and then there's number 3, change in number of sellers. Okay, so you imagine if you go to a market, right? And if you go to, let's say you go to the night market we have in Malaysia, or later we'll see, we have the Ramadan market, Ramadan Bazaar. And let's say there is only one seller that one seller of shawarma. Okay, and basically this seller, he sells one shawarma for $10. Okay, but then the next day you go, or let's say you are the seller of shawarma and you are selling for $10. Okay, and then the next day you go and open your shop, suddenly you find there's another seller of shawarma and he's selling the same shawarma. Okay, and instead of yeah, so now basically, because this is not the price, actually it's not yet the price, but this also will affect the price. Okay, but here the main point is the quantity. Okay, so for 10, and you can produce, let's say, 100 shawarmas every day, 100 quantity, and then because there's a second seller, he can also produce 100 quantity in the market. Okay, so now instead of 100 in the market, now there's 200 in the market. And so imagine if there's more and more sellers in the market, the number of shawarma will increase in the market. Okay, so we are focusing on the quantity first, okay, in terms of the supply. But of course, this will affect the price as well. Okay, as the number of sellers increase, the quantity increases, but the price will also be affected, and this will also determine the supply curve. Okay, so if we look at it, for example, right? So let's say the supply, if there's only one seller, is here, price and quantity. Okay, and basically you are selling 10, and you are supplying 100. Okay, but now because there is an increase in sellers from 1 to 2, what happens is that the supply curve will shift. Okay, so at 10, now the quantity is 200. The price is the same, but the quantity is 200. Right? But this does not mean that this is the price that is being sold in the market. Okay, we'll look at it later on, because the price that is being sold in the market would be determined by the interaction of the supply and demand curve. Okay, so this is just an example that you have to see for the supply. Okay, so the price at this moment doesn't change because we are just looking at the supply. Okay, so as more and more sellers come into the market, the supply curve will shift more and more to the right. Okay, so you see at price 10, the quantity increases as we go along. Okay, so that's factor number 3. Factor number 4 is the change in taxes and subsidies. Okay, so these are basically part of cost. Okay, so if there is an increase in tax, the cost will increase because now you have to pay more tax. Okay, and if there is an increase in subsidies, so subsidies is usually the amount that the government provides for assistance for sellers, especially, right? So then that will reduce the cost. Right, so when the cost is reduced, the supply will increase. Supply will increase. So imagine for the chicken sellers, just now I mentioned, they say, okay, the chicken feed has increased, the price for chicken feed has increased. But now the government says, oh, don't worry, we will subsidize the chicken feed. So if you buy, let's say for 100 kilos, you pay 1,000. So now we will subsidize, let's say 200. So the cost of buying the input price reduces, and therefore the supply would increase. Okay, so that's the factor of subsidy. And then factor number 5 is the change in price of other goods. So this is related to substitutes, just now, substitutes and complements. Okay, so substitutes is the example of the toothpaste. Okay, so if let's say the price of the substitute increases or decreases, this will also affect supply. Okay? And then complement is the example just now in terms of the printer and the ink. So if there is a change in the price of the ink, there will be also affecting the changes towards the printer. Right? So now you have to think of it from the perspective of the seller or the supplier. Okay, so this will also affect the supply curve. And then finally, the expectation. Okay, in terms of just now future income and future price. This will also affect the supply. Okay, so these are the 6 determinants of supply. Okay, actually this one, yeah. So you can try to do this. You can just try to think about what happens if microchips go down what happens to computer supply? Maybe Brother Mahmoud, can you try to think of what will happen if the price of microchips go down? What happens to the supply of computers? Are you there, Brother Mahmoud?
Yeah, the supply of computers will decrease
Why will it decrease?
because the microchips is something related that's late with the computer. Without it, the computer will not.
Okay, so if you are a computer producer,
Yeah,
you supply computers, right?
yeah.
So if the price of microchips decrease, what happens to the supply of computers?
Then there will be more supply of computers.
Right?
Yeah,
Why? Because now your cost reduces.
yeah,
You understand?
yeah,
Right, so you have to think of it from a seller's perspective.
yeah,
Right? So
yeah.
if the cost, so this is related to resource prices. Okay? So if the resource price reduces, then you would supply more. Right? Because now the cost of producing is much less. Okay? Yeah, so everyone can try to think of each one here, okay, and then the answers you can move to the next slide. Okay, just try to think about it. Okay, so usually in exams, these are the questions that will come. Okay, what will happen if there is for example here, what would happen if there is an increase in chicken suppliers? What would happen to the supply of chicken? Okay, so you can look at the answers here. Okay, I'll just skip this and then you can try it on your own later. Okay, so now, just now we were looking at demand curve. This is this demand. This is the price, this is the quantity. And then we also look at supply curve. Okay, demand and supply. Okay, so what happens is that when the demand and supply meets, there is a point that they meet. This is called the equilibrium. Okay, so the equilibrium occurs when demand and supply intersect. Okay, so at this point, at the equilibrium point here, we will have the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Okay, and this is basically what we call as the most efficient allocation, okay, of resources, whereby the demand and supply meets. Okay, so this will basically determine the market price. Okay, so when they meet, this is where the transaction will happen. Okay, so if at other places, let's say if the price of the let me just change the color. If the price of the item is at here, let's say P2, what happens is that there will be a surplus. Okay, and if let's say if it's at P3, what happens is basically there will be a shortage. Okay, for example, in P3, at P3, okay, let's say the price is P3. Okay, so because the price is low, the quantity that the suppliers are willing to supply is at Q3. And because the price is low, the quantity that buyers are willing to buy is at Q3A. Okay, so there is a mismatch between the demand and supply. So this area is basically a shortage because the quantity that is demanded is higher than the quantity that is supplied. Okay, and at P2 here, the supply is much higher than the demand. Okay, so this area is a surplus where the quantity that is supplied is much higher than the quantity that is demanded. Okay, so these are basically the market equilibrium. Okay, so you have to think, you think about just now, what is the quantity and price that you would be willing and able to buy for coffee, and also what is the price of coffee that you are willing and able to supply in the market if you are a seller. Okay, so it cannot, the transaction will not happen if there is no match between the supply and the demand. So from the perspective of a coffee shop owner, in order for you to sell the coffee, you would eventually have to reduce the price to meet the demand. Okay, so it's not something that you are only willing to sell the coffee for $20, for example, but are you able to sell the coffee at $20? So the other part must also come. So at $20, you are willing but not able. So in order for you to be able to sell the coffee, you have to actually reduce it to $15 or $10. Then you are willing and able to sell it. Okay, but if let's say you are even at $10, no one buys it, and you can only sell it if it's priced at $5. But actually at $5, you are selling at a loss because the cost of producing the coffee, for example, is $7. So at the end of the day, if you can only sell it for $5, okay, and the cost is $7, what happens is that you will close your shop. You will no longer supply because the more you supply, the more losses that you would have to incur, right? So basically, there must be a point where the buyers and sellers meet, okay, and intersect, and this is where the market equilibrium occurs. Okay, so if the price of the goods and services are below or above the market equilibrium, a surplus and a shortage will occur in the market. Okay, so basically the equilibrium represents the efficient allocation in the market, okay, whereby there is productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. I'll skip this slide, okay, because I want to focus on other parts. Okay, so basically, if we look at equilibrium price and quantity here, for example, okay, so I already drew it just now. Okay, so the green one is the demand curve, the red one is the supply curve. Okay, so in this market, ideally, the price of corn should be $3, and there will be around 7 units of corn that is being sold. So this is the equilibrium point. Okay, however, if let's say the price of the corn is, for whatever reason, being sold at $2, if, for example, if the government says you cannot sell the corn for $3, but the maximum that you can sell is only $2. Okay, so if this happens, there will be a shortage of corn because the seller will only be willing to supply 4 units of corn, but there will be an increase in demand for corn. Okay, so the demand for corn will be 11, for example. And basically the difference between the amount that is supplied here and the amount that is demanded here is the shortage. So there will not be enough corn in the market. Okay, because the price is operating at a level that is not in equilibrium. Okay, or below equilibrium in this case. Okay, so it's below equilibrium. So if another scenario is that the price is that is being sold is above the equilibrium, therefore, because the price is higher, suppliers are willing to supply more. Okay, suppliers are willing to supply more. So the suppliers are supplying at 10. Okay, but because the price is high, the demand for consumers is low. So there's only 4 units of demand. Okay, and because of that, what happens is that there will be a surplus. Surplus means that the supply that is being sold in the market is much lower than the much higher than the quantity demanded. So there will be oversupply in the market. So oversupply is a surplus. So this is the amount that is extra and not being sold in the market. So this happens when the market is operating, when it is operating above the equilibrium price. Okay, so this surplus and shortage is a form of market inefficiency. Okay, because there is either a shortage or a surplus. So this is not an efficient point to for the transaction to occur. So the only efficient point for the transaction is at 3, at the equilibrium. Okay, so this is basically at 3, the equilibrium price is 3 and the equilibrium quantity is 7. Okay, so there is also the change in demand and equilibrium, whereby the movement of the demand curve will determine the price that is being sold in the market. Right? So for example, here, there is an increase in demand. When there is an increase in demand, the price increases. Okay, when the demand shifts to the right from D1 to D2, the price also increases from P1 to P2. And the quantity increases from Q1 to Q2. Okay, so why does the demand increase from D1 to D2? Is because of the factors that we mentioned just now. Okay, you have to look at what are the determinants of the demand. Determinants of demand. Okay, and then there's also decrease in demand. So when there is a decrease in demand, the price and quantity fall. Okay, so this is what happens when demand changes. Okay, but there's also what happens when supply changes. So when there is an increase in supply, the price will reduce from P1 to P2 and the quantity will increase from Q1 to Q2 because of the movement in the supply, the shift in supply. Okay, so here it is increase, and then another scenario when there is a decrease in supply. Right, so there are different scenarios where there is a movement of demand and supply, and this will affect the price and quantity in the market. Right, so these are basically, you have to understand the movement in order to know the effect on the price and effect on quantity. Okay, so maybe you can try to memorize this table, or you can understand the supply and demand curve. Okay, so once you understand the supply and demand curve, you don't have to remember everything in the table. Okay, so there are also in the real world, especially times where the supply, so the supply is upward sloping, remember, and demand curve move at the same time. Okay, for example, here S1 and D1, and now the supply shift from S1 to S2, but at the same time, demand also shift from D1 to D2. Okay, so initially the equilibrium price is at P1 and the quantity is Q1, but now the new equilibrium is here. And basically, you can argue price doesn't change, but the quantity has increased to Q2. So this is equilibrium 1, and the equilibrium 2 has changed the price and it has changed the quantity, but not the price. But depending on the shift, maybe the price will also increase or decrease. Okay, so you have to see what is the degree of movement between the supply and the demand. Okay, but this is something that you have to understand, because later on, because we are just looking at supply and demand basics, because later when you look at macroeconomics, and especially in terms of the growth of GDP, or the progress of a country, it will also be related closely to the supply and demand curve. Okay, so it's important for you to understand it early on in order for you to understand the other concepts later on. Okay, yeah, so this is the example that I mentioned just now when it comes to the chicken, right? So there's the supply, demand, this is the equilibrium price. Okay, equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. Okay, but when the government sets a ceiling price, so the ceiling price is usually below the market equilibrium. So the government says, no, you cannot sell for, let's say the price of chicken is 10, but you cannot sell more than 8. Okay, so then there will be a mismatch between the supply and the quantity demanded. So quantity supply is here, the quantity demanded is here, and basically supply will be less than demand, and what happens here is a shortage of chicken. Okay, so when there is a price ceiling, there will be rationing problems, and there might be black markets. Okay, is there any question? Okay, we almost finished. Yeah. Okay, so this is the ceiling that was just now. Okay, there's also another thing that would happen. Okay, this is just a theory in terms of price floor. So price floors are prices that are set above the market price. Okay, an example is minimum wage. Okay, so this is a theory, but of course in practice it's different. Okay, so let's say the price of labor ideally is at that point, but now the floor price, meaning to say that the government says you cannot sell less than $3. Okay, so what happens is that there will be a surplus in this area where the supply, okay, so the quantity supplied is much higher than the quantity demanded. Okay, I think you can skip. That's just an example in terms of supply and demand. Okay, so those are the concepts that you have to really understand, because it's important moving forward. Okay, so any questions before I end the class? So the concept just now that we went through is this. Okay, remember market, demand, supply, equilibrium, changes in equilibrium, and also government intervention when government comes in and sets the price. Okay, hopefully everyone, if you don't understand, maybe you can try to go through the textbook and watch some videos that are available online. Okay, everyone, okay?
Okay,
with that?
doctor. These
Okay.
topics that do they have like mathematics, like calculus?
They
How we
do.
calculate this?
Yeah, they do. But we're not going to go through that
Okay.
because this is just principles of economics. So we are just learning the principles. But if you go much deeper, you will learn about the mathematics of it. But
Okay.
actually, we will touch upon a bit of mathematics when we look at inelasticity. When we look at elasticity of prices, because we will look at how the changes of prices will affect the quantity that is demanded. And there is some basic calculation. But of course, if you go deeper, there's a lot of mathematical equation, there's a lot of mathematical theories, but we will not go too much deep. We will not go too deep, just the basic, some basic mathematics. Okay, so this is just
Okay.
on the surface. It's just learning about the principles in economics. Okay, so this can hopefully make you better understand at the end of the day what is happening in the real world in economics. Okay, but yeah, if you look at the exercises that I ask you about your demand, your quantity. So those are the things when later on when you are buying in the cafe or selling things, you can start to think about it. Okay, so hopefully this can be beneficial for you, not only for this class but also anywhere in your life. Okay, so if there's no question or anything that you want to share, I think we can end the class. Okay, everyone okay? Or is there any questions regarding the assignment or the courses, the topics in the course so far?
Yeah, doctor, for the assignment, you said that you will provide us with an example.
Okay, I will upload it hopefully by tomorrow. You can check the Microsoft Teams. I will give you some assignments that I think are good from the previous students, so you can refer
Okay.
to that. Okay, hopefully by tomorrow
Okay.
you can check again in
For the
the
COVID,
Microsoft.
yeah, for
Microsoft
the
Teams.
social impact of COVID, can we use like any country?
Yeah, you can choose any country, but it's good if you know what other people are doing as well, because for example, if everyone is doing, let's say for Malaysia, right? Let's say everyone does for Malaysia, so it is inevitable for me as a as an examiner, I will compare your work with each other.
Yeah.
Right, so I will, of course, the person that does much better for his assignment, I will compare. Okay, this person does much better, and then the marks will of course be maybe if you do worse, then I will compare it to another student in the class that does a similar topic. So then it will affect how I put the marks. So it's good if you can do, everyone does a different country, so I can examine it without comparing it too much with each other. Right, so yeah, there's a lot of examples online. You can just Google, you will find the reports. Right, so your task is to basically get the information from all these various reports and put in writing in your own words. So it's very important not to plagiarize. Okay, so if you want to copy the ideas from the other reports, you can do it, but use it in your own words, and you make sure that you credit the original author. So you have to cite the author. Okay, any other questions?
Okay.
Okay.
Lecture, regarding my own case,
Sorry?
I will be able to have access to the Microsoft, inshallah, by tomorrow, maybe.
Have you message me?
No,
Did
I didn't.
wait. Let me just see.
But inshallah, maybe tomorrow I will have access to the.
Why? Because they didn't give your email yet?
It's today that the result of the EPT.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I can add you for now.
Okay.
What's your email?
Mahmoud Ibrahim Sheikh.
You can put it on WhatsApp and then I'll add manually. Okay. But later when I think you should, because basically for Microsoft Teams, it's good if you can use your IIUM email.
Yeah, so that's why I want to, yeah, inshallah.
If you don't use your IIUM email, it will be like this case. So I just put my Gmail, so you can only be a guest. But I can add you as a guest first. You can still access, but I think it's a bit limited in terms of your access.
Okay.
Just give me your email in WhatsApp and I'll add you here.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So anything else? Okay. In that case, I will. We can end the class with tasbih kifara in Surah Al-Asr. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wal 'asri innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihat wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr. Okay, thank you very much everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.